I always thought the greatest mistake of my life was letting a boy break my heart, until I found myself trapped under the intoxicating, dangerous gaze of his billionaire father. Welcome back to your BL boyfriend. If you are craving emotional, high-stakes romance stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, you are exactly in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave a big thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments below. It really helps the channel grow and lets us bring you more of the stories you love. Now grab a warm drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's story. Part 1. The rain fell in unforgiving sheets against the cracked window of my tiny apartment, each droplet mirroring the neon lights of the bustling city below. I sat curled up on a worn-out sofa, a cup of cheap instant coffee growing cold between my trembling hands. I wondered, not for the first time, how my life had fallen apart so completely. My name is Ren. I am 24 years old, a freelance interior designer, and an Omega. 6 months ago, I thought I knew what love was. I thought I had the world at my fingertips. I was so painfully, dangerously wrong. I pulled my knees closer to my chest, letting my silver blonde hair fall like a curtain around my face. In the reflection of the dark glass, I could see my pale skin and the dark circles under my eyes, a stark contrast to the bright, energetic person I used to be. For 2 agonizing years, I was completely devoted to a man who saw me as nothing more than a shiny new toy to be played with and discarded. His name was Julian, the sole heir to the Vance luxury hotel empire, one of the most prominent conglomerates in the country. When we first met, Julian was charming, magnetic, and overwhelming in the way only a young, arrogant alpha could be. He pursued me with a single-minded intensity that left me breathless. He showered me with expensive gifts, whisked me away to private islands, and looked at me as if I was the only person in the universe. I thought I had found my soulmate, but it didn't take long for the mask to slip. Julian didn't want a partner. He wanted a pet. He wanted a perfect, submissive Omega who would smile politely at high society galas, speak only when spoken to, and blindly tolerate his endless string of betrayals behind closed doors. The demands he placed on me were suffocating, slowly chipping away at my identity. "You're too plain, Rin," he would say, his voice dripping with condescension as he adjusted his expensive tie in the mirror. "You need to try harder. What kind of Omega can't even hold the attention of his alpha? You're boring." Those words cut deeper than any physical wound. I read books, I changed my wardrobe, I bent over backwards to become the flawless Omega he demanded. But the finish line was always moving. Nothing was ever enough for Julian Vance. His appetite for control and novelty was insatiable, and whenever I tried to set a boundary, his temper would flare, flooding our penthouse with a suffocating, aggressive scent that made my instincts scream in terror. The final, world-shattering straw broke 3 months ago. I had come home early from a rare design consultation, only to find him in our bed with someone else. He didn't even have the basic decency to look ashamed. Instead, he stood there, radiating toxic alpha pheromones, and blamed me. He told me my pathetic weakness drove him to it. Something inside me finally snapped. Without shedding a single tear, I packed a single bag, left the diamond rings and the black credit cards on the kitchen counter, and walked out into the freezing night. But Julian was a vindictive alpha. When he realized I wasn't coming back, he made it his mission to ruin me. He used his family's immense influence to blacklist me from every major design firm in the city. Whispers of my instability and lack of talent followed me to every job interview. My savings dwindled to almost nothing, my rent was past due, and the constant crushing stress was making me physically ill. Then, 2 days ago, a mysterious email arrived. It was from a highly exclusive private estate management company, offering a ridiculously large sum for an immediate, confidential interior renovation of a historic manor on the outskirts of the city. There was no client name attached to the contract, only a strict non-disclosure agreement and a set of GPS coordinates. The money being offered just for the initial consultation was enough to pay off my debts and secure my apartment for an entire year. Desperation makes a person remarkably brave. I signed the NDA, borrowed a friend's beat-up car, and drove out to the estate this morning. The drive took me deep into the dense, ancient pine forests surrounding the metropolis. The property was absolutely breathtaking, a sprawling, Gothic-style manor that looked like a fortress. As I pulled up to the massive iron gates that automatically swung open, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I parked and walked up the grand stone steps, clutching my leather portfolio to my chest like a protective shield. Before I could even knock, the heavy wooden doors swung open. I was ushered inside by a silent, impeccably dressed butler who offered no smile. He led me through dimly lit, cavernous hallways filled with dust-covered antiques, eventually guiding me into a vast, breathtaking library. The room smelled of old parchment, rich mahogany wood, and something else, a scent so deep, so purely, overwhelmingly alpha, that my knees actually weakened for a terrifying second. It was dark cedar, aged whiskey, and the sharp, crackling ozone of an incoming storm. It was a scent that demanded absolute submission, terrifyingly dominant, yet strangely intoxicating. "He will be with you shortly, sir," the butler murmured before vanishing like a ghost, closing the heavy oak doors with a soft click. I stood completely frozen in the center of the room. I tried to steady my erratic breathing, telling myself that this was just a client. Just a very wealthy, very intimidating client. I just needed to show him my design boards, collect my advance, and leave. Then, the doors opened again. I turned around, the polite, professional smile freezing instantly on my face. The portfolio slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the Persian rug with a dull thud. The man who walked into the library was a physical force of nature. He was incredibly tall, with broad, commanding shoulders clad in a bespoke, dark charcoal suit that looked sharper than a razor's edge. His hair was thick and raven black, lightly silvered at the temples, framing a face that looked as though it had been ruthlessly carved from solid granite. His jawline was sharp and unforgiving, but it was his eyes that pinned me completely to the spot. They were a piercing, stormy gray. They were cold and calculating, taking me in from head to toe with a single, sweeping glance that made my skin flush violently with unexpected heat. I recognized him instantly. Everyone in the country knew that face. Victor Vance. The self-made billionaire, the ruthless CEO of the Vance Empire, the most powerful alpha in the nation, and Julian's father. Pure, unadulterated panic seized my throat. I instinctively took a step back, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might shatter them. Julian had always spoken of his father with a bizarre mixture of awe and absolute terror. Victor was a widower who had built his massive empire from nothing, known in the business world for utterly destroying his rivals without a second thought. I had only seen him once, from a vast distance at a crowded corporate gala, and even then, his mere presence had been suffocating to everyone in the room. He was 48 years old, but he radiated a raw, primal energy that made men half his age look like children. Up close, alone in this quiet library, he was paralyzing. "Mr. Run," Victor said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that vibrated straight through the floorboards, traveled up my legs, and settled deep in my bones. "You are exactly on time. I appreciate punctuality." "And Mr. Vance," I stammered, internally cursing myself for the pathetic tremor in my voice. I didn't know you were the client. If this is some kind of sick joke orchestrated by Julian, I'll be leaving right now." I turned toward the door, my flight response fully activated. I just needed to get back to my car. "Julian has absolutely no idea you are here." Victor's voice cracked through the heavy air, freezing me dead in my tracks. "My son is an arrogant, short-sighted fool, but he is certainly not the one running my private estate. Turn around, Ruin." It wasn't a request. It was an alpha command, heavily laced with a natural authority that my omega biology instinctively responded to. I turned back around slowly, my breath hitching in my throat as I saw him walking toward me. Victor moved with slow, deliberate grace, like a large apex predator circling its prey. He stopped just 2 feet away from me. Up close, his scent of cedar and ozone was absolutely overwhelming, wrapping completely around my senses. It began to soothe the frayed, anxious edges of my mind, even as it commanded my absolute respect. It was nothing like Julian's sharp, desperate scent. Victor's presence was like a heavy, weighted blanket, heavy enough to crush you, but warm enough to make you desperately want to stay underneath it. "I have spent the last week meticulously reviewing your portfolio," Victor said, his stormy eyes locking onto mine. "Your work is exceptional. It has a soul. Something my son clearly failed to recognize." My breath caught. I stared up at him. You know about us?" "I make it my absolute business to know everything that happens concerning my family," Victor replied, his jaw tightening dangerously. "I know that you were with Julian. I know he treated you abhorrently. And I know he actively blacklisted you from the city's design community because his fragile ego could not handle an Omega walking out on him. He is an embarrassment to the Vance name." I was completely speechless. This legendary, terrifying older man was standing in front of me, defending me. I brought you here because I have a proposition, Victor continued, taking one microscopic step closer. The air between us suddenly felt incredibly thick, charged with a heavy electric tension. I need this manor redesigned. It has been empty and cold since my wife passed away 20 years ago. I want it brought back to life, and I want you to do it. Why me? I whispered, unable to break eye contact. Because they do not possess your unique resilience, Victor said softly. He slowly raised a large hand, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to touch my cheek. Instead, he gestured to the room around us. You will live here, in the East Wing, during the renovation. You will be paid triple your usual rate. And I will personally ensure that the blacklist my son placed against you is destroyed by tomorrow morning. It was an offer I literally couldn't refuse. But looking deeply into Victor Vance's intense eyes, I felt a dangerous, magnetic pull, an undeniable attraction that terrified me far more than my poverty ever could. This man was Julian's father. It was a scandalous line that should never be crossed. I accept the job, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But, strictly professional, Mr. Vance. A slow, remarkably dangerous smirk played at the corner of Victor's lips. Of course, Ren, he murmured, his voice dropping an octave lower, sending a hot shiver straight down my spine. Strictly professional. Let us see exactly how long that lasts. End of Part 1. Part 2. Moving into the East Wing of the Vance Manor felt entirely surreal, like stepping out of a freezing, relentless nightmare and into a beautifully painted, gilded dream. After my heart-stopping encounter with Victor in the library, I had driven back to my drafty, cramped apartment in a total daze. The very next morning, true to his word, a pristine black town car had arrived at my curb. The driver, a polite alpha who introduced himself as part of Victor's private security detail, efficiently packed my meager belongings into the trunk. By noon, I was standing in the center of a suite that was larger than my entire previous apartment building. The suite was breathtaking. It featured towering floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the dense, sprawling pine forests and a private balcony that let in the crisp, clean mountain air. The bed was a massive, plush four-poster masterpiece draped in heavy silk and Egyptian cotton. But despite the overwhelming luxury, the room, much like the rest of the manor, felt deeply melancholic. The colors were muted, the furniture was draped in subtle shadows, and the air held a heavy, profound stillness. It was a house that had forgotten how to live, waiting patiently for someone to breathe warmth back into its ancient stone walls. For the first 3 days, I threw myself entirely into my work. I used the quiet isolation as a shield against my own chaotic, spiraling thoughts. Armed with my sketch pads, measuring tapes, and a newfound sense of artistic freedom, I roamed the cavernous halls of the manor. I mapped out the grand foyers, envisioned soft, warm lighting in the sterile corridors, and selected rich, inviting fabrics to replace the heavy, morning drapes that blocked out the sun. I was determined to keep my promise to myself. Strictly professional. I was here to do a job, collect my staggering paycheck, and rebuild my shattered independent life. I would not allow myself to be distracted by the suffocatingly powerful, intoxicatingly handsome alpha who owned the estate. But Victor Vance was not a man who could easily be ignored. Even when he was away in the city managing his multi-billion-dollar empire, his presence lingered in every corner of the manor. His scent, that mesmerizing, terrifying blend of dark cedar, aged whiskey, and the crackling ozone of a thunderstorm, was permanently woven into the fabric of the house. Every time I breathed in, my Omega instincts would hum with a confusing mixture of submission and profound, unexplainable safety. It was maddening. The real test of my fragile resolve came on the evening of my 4th day at the estate. A heavy, torrential rainstorm had rolled in from the mountains, violently lashing against the thick glass windows of the manor. The rolling thunder shook the floorboards beneath my feet. I had set up a temporary workspace in the corner of the grand library, sitting cross-legged on the plush Persian rug, surrounded by dozens of fabric swatches, color palettes, and scattered architectural blueprints. I was so deeply engrossed in drafting a redesign for the main dining hall that I didn't hear the heavy oak doors open. "You are going to ruin your eyesight working in such terrible lighting, Rin," I gasped, my charcoal pencil snapping in half against the paper. I scrambled to my feet, my heart leaping into my throat. Victor was standing in the doorway. He looked exhausted, yet devastatingly attractive. The sharp, intimidating edge of the ruthless CEO had softened slightly. He had discarded his suit jacket. His crisp white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, exposing a tantalizing glimpse of a strong, tanned throat, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing thick, muscular forearms corded with prominent veins. The storm outside seemed to amplify his natural alpha pheromones, filling the library with a heavy, magnetic energy that made my knees tremble. "Mr. Vance," I stammered, frantically smoothing down my oversized, paint-stained sweater. "I apologize. I didn't realize you had returned from the city. I lost track of time." Victor closed the doors behind him, shutting out the echoing sounds of the empty manor, leaving us completely isolated in the intimate, warm space of the library. He walked slowly toward me, his dark, stormy gray eyes sweeping over my messy hair, my flushed cheeks, and the chaotic sea of papers scattered across his priceless rug. "I told you, Rin, there is no need to look so terrified every time I enter a room," Victor murmured, his deep baritone voice rumbling like the thunder outside. "And when we are alone, outside of formal business hours, you may call me Victor." I don't think that would be appropriate, sir," I whispered, clutching my ruined sketchpad tightly to my chest as if it could protect my racing heart. A faint, incredibly attractive smirk touched the corner of his lips. He stopped just at the edge of my scattered blueprints, deliberately keeping a respectful distance, though his intense gaze made me feel completely exposed. "Appropriate," Victor mused, the word rolling off his tongue like dark honey. A very rigid word for someone with such a beautifully fluid, creative mind. "May I see what has captured your attention so thoroughly that you forgot to turn on the main chandelier?" I hesitated, my insecurities flaring up instinctively. For 2 years, Julian had mocked my designs. He had called my taste cheap and uninspired, constantly reminding me that an Omega's tiny brain couldn't possibly grasp high-end luxury. My hands shook slightly as I knelt down to gather my main sketchpad, terrified of seeing that same condescending judgment in Victor's eyes. It's just rough drafts," I mumbled, hesitantly handing the leather-bound book toward him. "Concepts for the main dining hall and the conservatory. You probably won't like them. I can completely change the direction if you find them unsatisfactory." Victor took the book from my trembling hands, his large, warm fingers brushing lightly against mine. A sharp, electric shock traveled straight up my arm, making my breath hitch audibly. If he noticed my reaction, he didn't show it. Instead, he directed his full, terrifyingly intense focus onto my drawings. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the rhythmic, violent drumming of the rain against the window panes. My stomach twisted into painful knots. I waited for the criticism. I waited for the harsh, booming voice telling me I was worthless. Instead, Victor let out a soft, genuine exhale of wonder. "Run," he said softly, looking up from the page. His stormy eyes were wide, completely stripped of their usual calculating coldness. "This is extraordinary." I blinked, genuinely stunned. "It is. You have completely reimagined the space without destroying its historical integrity," Victor continued, his voice laced with absolute sincerity. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, holding the book out so we could look at it together. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his large, imposing body. "The way you've incorporated natural light, the introduction of these warm amber tones against the dark mahogany, it's brilliant. It feels—" He paused, his gaze softening as he looked down at me. "It feels like a home. Something this house hasn't been in a very, very long time." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes before I could stop them. I quickly blinked them away, desperately fighting the overwhelming wave of emotion. To have my work validated, to be seen and respected by a man of his incredible stature, was a completely alien sensation. It unlocked something deep within my chest, a tight, heavy knot of self-doubt that I had carried for years slowly beginning to unravel. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. Julian always told me my work was too emotional, too soft. The moment his son's name left my lips, the atmosphere in the room violently shifted. Victor's jaw clenched so hard I heard his teeth grind. A low, threatening growl rumbled deep in his chest. A pure, unfiltered alpha reaction to a perceived threat against an Omega. His pheromones spiked, filling the room with a sharp, protective intensity. "My son," Victor said, his voice dropping to a deadly, icy whisper, "is a blind, uncultured idiot who wouldn't recognize true beauty if it was staring him directly in the face." Victor slowly closed the sketchbook and tossed it onto a nearby armchair. He then turned his full attention back to me. Before I could process his movements, he reached out, his large, calloused hand gently cupping my cheek. His thumb brushed softly over my cheekbone, wiping away a stray tear that had managed to escape. I froze. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded him of my strict, professional boundaries. But his touch was so incredibly gentle, so agonizingly tender, that my omega biology completely short-circuited my brain. My eyes fluttered shut involuntarily, and a soft, embarrassing purr vibrated deep in my throat as I leaned into his massive, warm palm. "You are immensely talented, Ren," Victor murmured, stepping even closer. The distance between us was virtually non-existent now. I had to tilt my head back to look up at his towering figure. "You have a beautiful mind, a pure soul, and a resilience that leaves me utterly captivated. Do not ever let the fragile insecurities of a weak boy convince you that you are anything less than magnificent." My heart was beating so violently against my ribs, I thought it might shatter. His words sank into my skin, healing wounds I didn't even know were bleeding. I opened my eyes, getting lost in the deep, stormy gray of his gaze. There was a raw, burning hunger hidden beneath his disciplined exterior, a longing that matched the desperate, awakening fire in my own body. "Victor," I breathed, the name slipping past my lips without my permission. It felt heavy and right on my tongue. His eyes darkened instantly at the sound of his name. His hand slid from my cheek, his long fingers threading slowly into the hair at the nape of my neck, sending a cascade of fireworks down my spine. His gaze dropped to my lips, lingering there with agonizing intensity. The tension in the air was so thick it was suffocating. The entire world outside the library ceased to exist. There was only the storm, the scent of cedar, and the overwhelming, gravitational pull of this dominant, perfect alpha. He leaned down, his face mere inches from mine. I could feel his warm breath ghosting across my trembling lips. I instinctively parted them, my body practically begging him to close the distance, logic and reason entirely abandoned to the wind. But right before our lips could touch, the heavy chime of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway echoed through the manor, shattering the spell. Victor froze. A microscopic tremor ran through his powerful frame. He squeezed his eyes shut for a brief second, his chest heaving as he violently reined in his primal instincts with an immense display of willpower. He slowly, agonizingly pulled his hand away from my hair and took a deliberate step back, clearing his throat. "It is late," Victor said, his voice noticeably thicker and rougher than usual. He ran a hand through his dark hair, looking everywhere but at my lips. "You should not be working these ridiculous hours, Ren. I did not hire you to work yourself to exhaustion. Harrison has prepared a late dinner in the small dining room. Please, wash your hands and join me." He didn't wait for my answer. He turned and walked out of the library with swift, rigid strides, leaving the heavy doors open behind him. I stood completely alone in the center of the room, my body burning with a confusing mixture of profound disappointment and terrifying adrenaline. I pressed my trembling fingers to my lips, still feeling the ghost of his breath against my skin. I was falling into a highly dangerous trap. I was an employee, an omega recovering from intense trauma, and he was my abusive ex-boyfriend's untouchable, billionaire father. It was a line that society, logic, and common sense screamed at me never to cross. But as I looked toward the open doorway, smelling the lingering, intoxicating scent of dark cedar and storm clouds, I knew with terrifying certainty that it was already far too late. The boundary was blurring, the walls were crumbling, and I was utterly, hopelessly terrified of how much I wanted Victor Vance to completely destroy them. End of Part 2. Part 3. Walking down the shadowy, cavernous hallways toward the small dining room felt like navigating through a beautiful, waking dream. My heart was still hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribcage, the ghost of Victor's breath still burning against my lips. I had locked myself in the East Wing bathroom for 10 minutes, splashing freezing water onto my flushed face and staring at my wide, trembling eyes in the gilded mirror. The omega inside of me was purring with a deep, primal satisfaction, begging me to run back to the library and demand the kiss that had been so agonizingly interrupted. But the rational, deeply traumatized part of my brain was screaming at me to pack my bags and flee into the storm before I made a catastrophic mistake. I didn't flee. The gravitational pull of Victor Vance was simply too strong to resist. When I finally stepped into the small dining room, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the echoing, imposing grandeur of the rest of the manor. A massive stone fireplace crackled warmly in the corner, casting dancing golden shadows across the rich mahogany walls. The heavy oak table was set for two, illuminated by the soft, intimate glow of tall beeswax candles. Victor was already seated at the head of the table. He had put his suit jacket back on, once again embodying the untouchable, formidable billionaire CEO. But as I cautiously stepped into the room, his stormy gray eyes flicked upward, instantly softening. The terrifyingly cold exterior melted away, leaving only the protective, incredibly attentive Alpha, who had almost kissed me in the library. "I apologize for the delay," I murmured, my voice betraying my lingering nervousness as I awkwardly hovered near the empty chair to his right. "There is no need to apologize, Ren," Victor replied, his deep baritone washing over me like a wave of pure comfort. He smoothly stood up, a gesture of respect that Julian had never, not once, offered me, and pulled out the chair for me. "Please sit. You look as though a stiff wind might knock you over. Harrison has prepared a magnificent meal, and I expect you to eat. You are far too thin." I blushed deeply as I sat down, hyper-aware of his massive presence looming right behind me before he returned to his own seat. Harrison, the silent and impeccable butler, materialized from the shadows to serve a breathtaking spread of roasted duck with a cherry reduction, wild mushroom risotto, and a bottle of deep, crimson wine that looked older than I was. For the first few minutes, we ate in a thick, charged silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware and the violent howling of the storm outside. I was so incredibly nervous that I could barely taste the exquisite food, but I forced myself to eat under Victor's watchful, intense gaze. He didn't rush me. He simply sat there, elegantly sipping his wine, giving me the space I needed to steady my fraying nerves. "How long have you been hiding your incredible talent behind commercial design firms?" Victor asked suddenly, breaking the quiet with a question that caught me entirely off guard. I swallowed hard, setting my fork down. I haven't exactly been hiding. It's just that most high-end clients prefer established, older names. And when I was with Julian, he didn't like me working. He said an Omega's place was at his side, looking pretty for the cameras. Whenever I tried to take on independent clients, he would subtly sabotage the deals. A dark, terrifying shadow passed over Victor's face. The heavy scent of cedar and ozone spiked in the room, a clear indication of his alpha anger flaring up at the mention of his son's abuse. The wine glass in his hand creaked dangerously under the sudden, immense pressure of his grip. "Julian is a weak, deeply insecure boy who needs to break others to feel tall," Victor said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, icy growl. He carefully set the glass down before it shattered. He leaned forward, locking his piercing gray eyes onto mine. "You are not an accessory, Ren. You possess a brilliant, creative mind. Your vision for the library and the dining hall, it is exactly what this estate has needed for 2 decades. I want you to know that your work is not just acceptable, it is deeply, profoundly valued here." Tears pricked my eyes again, and I looked down at my lap, utterly overwhelmed. "Thank you, Victor." Using his first name felt forbidden, like tasting a dangerously addictive poison, but it made his eyes darken with a flash of raw, undeniable pleasure. The rest of the dinner passed in a surprisingly warm, easy conversation. Victor asked me about my childhood, my inspirations, and my dreams for the future. In return, he shared small, carefully guarded fragments of his own past. He told me about building the Vance Empire from a single, rundown hotel. He spoke briefly of his late wife, Amelia, with a quiet, respectful melancholy, explaining how the manor had lost its soul the day she passed away. He listened to me with such fierce, undivided attention that I felt entirely exposed, yet completely, unconditionally safe. It was the most beautiful, intoxicating evening of my entire life. Over the next 3 weeks, a highly dangerous, unspoken routine developed between us. During the day, I poured my soul into the renovation project. The estate was slowly coming back to life under my direction. Heavy drapes were replaced with airy silks, dark rooms were illuminated with warm, golden light, and the suffocating gloom was slowly being chased away. But it was the evenings that truly tested my sanity. Every night, without fail, I joined Victor for dinner. Afterward, we would retreat to the grand library. We spent hours talking, reading, or simply existing in a comfortable, companionable silence by the crackling fire. He would ask for my opinion on his business acquisitions, valuing my perspective in a way that made my chest swell with pride. Sometimes, I would catch him staring at me over the rim of his whiskey glass, his eyes burning with that same raw, barely restrained hunger I had seen on that rainy night. But he never crossed the line again. He was practicing superhuman restraint, allowing me to heal at my own pace, proving to me every single day that he was fundamentally different from his son. I was falling in love with him. It was a terrifying, breathtaking freefall, and I had absolutely no desire to pull the parachute. The illusion of our isolated, perfect paradise shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the sunroom, reviewing fabric swatches for the master bedroom suite. Victor was in the city attending a board meeting, so the manor was quiet. My old cell phone, the one I kept purely for emergency contacts from my old landlord, suddenly began to vibrate violently on the glass table. I glanced at the screen, and my blood instantly turned to absolute ice. Julian. My breath hitched, a wave of cold panic crashing over my body. My Omega instincts immediately flared with pure terror, flooding my system with a sour, distressed scent. He had found me. How had he found my old number? I stared at the buzzing phone as if it were a venomous snake, utterly paralyzed. My hands shook so violently that when I reached out to silence it, I knocked it onto the floor. It kept ringing and ringing. Suddenly, the heavy doors to the sunroom opened. I practically jumped out of my skin, letting out a pathetic, frightened gasp. Victor stood in the doorway. He had returned early. The moment he stepped into the room, his nostrils flared, instantly detecting the heavy, sour scent of my absolute terror. The relaxed, handsome CEO vanished in the blink of an eye, completely replaced by a lethal, dominating alpha predator. "Run," Victor barked, his voice vibrating with absolute authority as he crossed the room in 3 massive strides. "What is wrong? Who hurt you?" "He's calling," I stammered, pointing a violently trembling finger at the phone spinning on the marble floor. "Julian, he's calling me. I don't know how he got this number. I don't want to talk to him, Victor. Please." Victor's jaw locked into a terrifyingly rigid line. He didn't say a word. He simply bent down, picked up the ringing phone, and accepted the call, putting it on speaker for me to hear. "Run, you pathetic little bitch," Julian's slurred, aggressive voice instantly filled the sunroom. He sounded drunk and violently angry. "Did you really think you could just hide from me? You think you can survive without my money? You're nothing without me. I heard you took some shady, isolated renovation job. Tell me where you are right now, and maybe I'll let you crawl back into my bed." I flinched violently, covering my ears with my hands, my eyes filling with terrified tears. Victor's expression was a mask of cold, unadulterated murder. The alpha pheromones radiating from his massive body were so incredibly heavy and suffocating that the glass panes of the sunroom practically rattled. "Hello, Julian," Victor said. His voice was deathly quiet, yet it carried the terrifying force of a nuclear shockwave. Silence. Absolute, terrifying silence echoed from the other end of the line. I could practically hear the blood draining from Julian's arrogant face. "Father," Julian squeaked, his aggressive bravado evaporating instantly into pure, pathetic panic. "What? Why do you have Ren's phone? Where are you?" "I am standing in the east wing of my private estate," Victor replied smoothly, though his eyes were blazing with a lethal fire. "With the exceptionally talented lead designer I recently hired to renovate the property. A designer you abused, terrorized, and foolishly attempted to blacklist." "Father, you don't understand. He's lying to you." Julian panicked, his voice trembling violently. "He's manipulative. He's trying to use you to get back at me. You can't let him stay there. The only manipulative, pathetic creature in this situation is the one currently whining on the other end of this line," Victor growled, his alpha dominance flooding the room, forcing absolute submission. "Listen to me very carefully, Julian, because I will only say this once. Ren is under my absolute, unconditional protection. If you ever contact him again, if you ever speak his name, if you so much as breathe in his general direction, I will strip you of your title. I will freeze every single asset in your name. I will throw you out of the Vance Empire so fast your head will spin, and I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life scrubbing toilets to survive. Father, please. Do you understand me, boy?" Victor roared, a true alpha command that physically shook the room. "Why, yes. Yes, Father, I understand. I'm sorry." Julian sobbed, completely broken. Victor didn't bother to respond. He simply ended the call, his large thumb pressing the screen with enough force to crack the glass. Then, with a casual, terrifying display of pure strength, he snapped the phone completely in half and dropped the broken pieces into a nearby trash bin. The silence that followed was heavy and thick with adrenaline. I was trembling uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face, my knees finally giving out beneath me. Before I could hit the floor, Victor was there. He caught me in his massive, powerful arms, pulling me flush against his solid chest. I buried my face into his crisp white shirt, my hands desperately gripping his broad shoulders as I broke down entirely. Months of repressed fear, humiliation, and trauma finally spilled out of me in violent, heaving sobs. "I've got you," Victor murmured fiercely, his deep voice vibrating against my cheek as he wrapped his arms tightly around my shaking frame. He buried his face in my silver-blonde hair, breathing in my scent, deliberately flooding the air with his soothing, protective cedar pheromones to calm my panicked Omega instincts. "You are safe, Rin. I swear to you on my life, you are safe. He will never, ever touch you again." "I was so scared," I sobbed, clutching him tighter, completely abandoning any remaining pretense of professional boundaries. "I thought he was going to take everything away from me again." "Never," Victor promised, his large hand gently, rhythmically stroking up and down my spine, easing the violent tremors racking my body. "You belong here. You are exactly where you are meant to be." We sank to the floor together, bathed in the warm afternoon sunlight. I sat sideways in his lap, securely caged in the protective warmth of his massive arms, crying until there were simply no tears left. He held me through it all, an immovable mountain of strength and safety. As my sobs slowly faded into exhausted hiccups, I realized that I didn't just feel safe. I felt home. As I rested my head against Victor's rapidly beating heart, breathing in the intoxicating scent of the alpha who had fiercely protected me, the undeniable truth finally slammed into my chest. I wasn't just falling in love with Victor Vance. I was already entirely, completely, and hopelessly his. End of Part 3. Part 4. The aftermath of my emotional breakdown in the sunroom shifted the very foundation of my existence at the Vance estate. When my tears finally subsided, leaving me a boneless, exhausted weight against Victor's chest, he hadn't awkwardly pulled away or offered stiff, professional platitudes. Instead, with effortless, terrifying strength, he had scooped me up into his arms, carrying me through the echoing halls of the manor as if I weighed absolutely nothing. He brought me to my suite in the East Wing, gently laid me down on the plush mattress, and pulled the heavy silk comforter over my trembling shoulders. I had expected him to leave, to return to his billion-dollar empire and the boundaries we had so desperately tried to maintain. But as my heavy eyelids fluttered shut, pulling me into a deep, exhausted sleep, the last thing I felt was the massive, warm weight of Victor sitting in the armchair beside my bed, standing guard like a relentless sentinel. He stayed there all night, his soothing cedar and ozone pheromones blanketing the room, ensuring that no nightmares could reach me. In the weeks that followed that fateful afternoon, Julian became nothing more than a ghost of a bad memory. True to his terrifying promise, Victor had entirely neutralized his son. The threatening phone calls ceased. The suffocating anxiety that used to grip my chest every time I heard a loud noise slowly dissolved, replaced by a profound, radiant sense of safety. With my trauma finally receding, I threw myself entirely into the final stages of the manor's renovation. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The heavy, morning shadows of the past 20 years were completely stripped away. The grand foyers now basked in warm, amber light. The cavernous hallways were adorned with vibrant, tasteful art, and the magnificent library, our library, had become the beating heart of the home, smelling of old paper, leather, and the intoxicating blend of our mingling scents. My natural Omega scent, a soft, delicate note of white peach and spring rain, had begun to subconsciously bleed into Victor's dark cedar, creating a permanent, intoxicating perfume that lingered in every room we shared. But as the estate blossomed, a new, agonizing anxiety began to slowly paralyze me. The renovation contract was coming to an end. There were only 3 days left before the final walkthrough. 3 days before my incredibly generous payment would be transferred to my bank account. 3 days before my professional excuse for living in Victor Vance's house, sleeping under his roof, and eating dinner across from him every night would completely expire. The thought of packing my bags and returning to a lonely, isolated apartment in the city made my chest ache so violently I could barely breathe. I had fallen irrevocably, hopelessly in love with a man 24 years my senior, a man of unimaginable power and wealth, who treated me with a reverence and respect I never thought I deserved. But despite our deep, lingering glances, the accidental brushes of our hands that sent electric shocks down my spine, and the intense, possessive way he scented the air whenever another alpha contractor came too close to me, Victor had not crossed the physical line. He was a man of strict discipline, waiting patiently for me to heal, completely unaware that I was already entirely his. The breaking point arrived on a Friday evening, precisely 48 hours before my contract was set to terminate. Victor had returned from the city earlier than usual. I was in the main foyer, nervously double-checking the placement of a newly imported crystal chandelier, when the heavy front doors swung open. He stepped inside, shrugging off his dark wool overcoat and handing it to Harrison. He looked dangerously handsome, his stormy gray eyes immediately locking onto me from across the vast marble floor. "Run," Victor called out, his deep baritone echoing warmly in the redesigned space. He closed the distance between us, his gaze sweeping over me with that familiar, heavy intensity. "The foyer is spectacular. You have truly outdone yourself." "Thank you, Victor," I murmured, forcing a polite smile, though my heart was breaking. The final fixtures were installed today. Technically, my work here is complete. The words hung in the air between us like a physical blade. Victor's jaw instantly tightened, his eyes darkening. The air around us grew thick and heavy with a sudden spike of his alpha pheromones, agitated and restless. "I see," Victor said quietly, his voice dropping a dangerous octave. He stepped closer, invading my personal space until I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "And what are your plans now, Ren? Will you return to the city?" I swallowed hard, desperately fighting the tears that threatened to ruin my composure. "I suppose so. Thanks to your generous payment, I can afford to lease a beautiful studio space. I can finally launch my own independent firm. It's everything I've ever wanted." "Is it?" Victor asked softly, his intense gaze piercing straight through my weak facade, searching my very soul. Before I could answer, he smoothly changed the subject, though the heavy tension remained. "Tomorrow evening, I am required to attend the annual Vance Foundation Charity Gala in the city center. It is a highly publicized, formal event. Usually, I endure these tedious affairs alone." He paused, raising his large hand. For a breathless second, his knuckles lightly brushed against my cheek, sending a blazing trail of fire across my skin. "I do not want to attend alone tomorrow, Ren," Victor murmured, his voice incredibly low and rough. "Accompany me. Not as my employee. Not as my designer. Just be by my side." My breath hitched. The Vance Foundation Gala was the social event of the year. The entire city's elite would be there. The press, the billionaires, the old money families. And Julian's father was asking me, his son's ex-boyfriend, to walk through those doors on his arm. It was a massive, highly public statement. It was scandalous. It was incredibly dangerous. I don't have anything suitable to wear to an event like that," I whispered weakly, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A slow, devastatingly attractive smirk played on Victor's lips. "I have already taken the liberty of having something tailored for you. It is waiting in your suite. Say yes, Ren." "Yes." The word tumbled out of my mouth before my brain could even process it. The next evening was a whirlwind of nervous anticipation. When I finally unzipped the garment bag Victor had left on my bed, I actually gasped. It was a bespoke, three-piece suit in a breathtaking shade of midnight blue silk. It was tailored to perfection, hugging my waist and accentuating my delicate omega frame in a way that made me feel incredibly powerful and elegant. There was also a small velvet box sitting on the nightstand. Inside was a stunning, subtle silver lapel pin shaped like a crescent moon, glittering with tiny, flawless diamonds. When I finally descended the grand staircase, Victor was waiting in the foyer. He was dressed in a classic, impossibly sharp black tuxedo that made him look like dark royalty. As I walked down the steps, his stormy gray eyes locked onto me, completely freezing in place. The absolute, unfiltered hunger and pure awe radiating from his gaze made my knees weak. "You are breathtaking," Victor breathed as I reached the bottom step. He didn't hesitate. He reached out, firmly taking my hand and pulling me flush against his side. He leaned down, pressing his nose against the scent gland on my neck. He inhaled deeply, a soft, vibrating growl rumbling in his chest as he deliberately bathed me in his heavy cedar pheromones. It was an unmistakable, deeply possessive alpha claim. Absolutely magnificent. The ride to the city was a blur of electric tension. When our sleek limousine finally pulled up to the red carpet outside the Grand Hotel, the flashing lights of the paparazzi were blinding. Victor stepped out first, instantly commanding the attention of every single person in the vicinity. His aura was suffocatingly powerful. But instead of walking ahead, he turned, offering me his large, warm hand. The moment I stepped out of the car and the crowd realized who I was, a wave of shocked, frantic whispers erupted like wildfire. Isn't that Julian Vance's ex-boyfriend? Why is he with Victor? Look at how close they are. I stiffened, my Omega instincts shrinking under the heavy, judgmental stares of the elite. But Victor immediately wrapped a heavy, possessive arm securely around my waist, pulling me impossibly close. He radiated a terrifying, lethal dominance that silently dared anyone to speak a single word against me. "Keep your head high, Ren," Victor murmured directly into my ear, his breath sending a shiver down my spine. "You are the most beautiful, valuable person in this entire city. Let them look. Let them see exactly who you belong with." We walked into the grand ballroom as a united front. The entire night, Victor never once let me go. He introduced me to CEOs, politicians, and foreign dignitaries, not as a designer, but simply as Run, his voice dripping with such profound respect and possessiveness that no one dared to question our age gap or our controversial history. Whenever a younger alpha's gaze lingered on me for a second too long, Victor's arm would tighten around my waist, his eyes flashing with a deadly warning that instantly sent them scrambling away. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't a trophy being displayed. I was a partner, fiercely protected and deeply cherished by the most powerful man in the room. When we finally returned to the estate just past midnight, the silence of the manor enveloped us like a warm embrace. The adrenaline of the evening was still rushing through my veins, making my skin burn and my heart race. Victor helped me off with my coat in the dimly lit foyer. His movements were slow, agonizingly deliberate. As the heavy coat slipped from my shoulders, his hands lingered, his large palms resting heavily on my waist. He slowly turned me around to face him. The formal mask of the CEO was completely gone. His eyes were dark, stormy, and wild with an emotion he had repressed for 2 long months. The air between us was so thick with pheromones I could practically taste the cedar and ozone on my tongue. "The contract ends on Monday," I whispered, the painful reality crashing back down on me. I looked up into his intense eyes, tears instantly welling in my own. "I have to leave, Victor." "No." The word was a rough, forceful command that tore straight from the depths of his chest. His hands tightened on my waist, pulling me flush against his solid, muscular body. "You are not leaving this house, Ren," Victor growled, his voice trembling with a raw, desperate vulnerability that shattered my heart. He reached up, his large hands frantically cupping my face, his thumbs wiping away the tears that spilled over my cheeks. "I have spent the last 2 months exercising every ounce of willpower I possess. I told myself you needed time. I told myself I was too old for you, that my family had already caused you enough pain. I tried to be a gentleman and let you heal. Victor." I choked out a sob, leaning my face deeply into his massive palms. "But watching you tonight," Victor continued, his breath ghosting over my trembling lips, his stormy eyes burning into my soul. "Watching you shine so beautifully, knowing that you were going to pack your bags and walk out of my life. I cannot do it. I will not survive it. You brought my home back to life, Ren, but you also brought me back to life. I am completely, utterly in love with you." The confession stopped my heart entirely. "I love you too," I sobbed, throwing my arms tightly around his neck, burying my hands into his thick raven hair. "I've been so scared you only saw me as a charity case. I don't want to leave. I want to stay here with you. Always." A ragged, breathless sound escaped Victor's throat, a sound of pure, agonizing relief. He didn't wait another second. His lips crashed down onto mine with a desperate, overwhelming hunger. The kiss was explosive, instantly erasing every boundary, every rule, and every doubt we had ever harbored. His mouth was hot, demanding, and incredibly thorough, completely claiming me. I opened for him instantly, moaning softly into his mouth as his tongue swept inside, tasting like expensive champagne and dark desire. I clung to him like a drowning man, my body melting entirely against his hard lines. His large hands slid down my back, gripping my hips and lifting me slightly off the marble floor so he could kiss me deeper, harder. The world outside the manor ceased to exist. There was only Victor, my protector, my alpha, my home. When we finally broke apart to gasp for air, our foreheads resting against each other, Victor was breathing heavily, his eyes dilated with pure, unrestrained adoration. "You are never leaving," Victor murmured against my swollen lips, claiming me with absolute, final certainty. "You are mine, Ren. and I am yours. End of Part 4. Part 5. Waking up the morning after the Vance Foundation Gala felt like ascending into an entirely different universe. When I slowly blinked my eyes open, the first thing that hit my senses was the overwhelming, comforting scent of dark cedar and the crackling ozone of a thunderstorm. I wasn't in my temporary suite in the East Wing. I was lying in the center of the colossal, king-sized bed in the master suite, cocooned in heavy, dark silk sheets. A massive, incredibly warm arm was draped protectively across my waist, pinning me flush against a broad, muscular chest. I held my breath, slowly turning my head. Victor was fast asleep beside me, his face buried in the crook of my neck, his nose pressed firmly against my omega scent gland. Even in sleep, his alpha instincts were fully engaged, instinctively claiming and protecting me. The harsh, intimidating lines of the ruthless billionaire CEO were completely smoothed out, leaving him looking devastatingly handsome and remarkably peaceful. We hadn't gone any further than that explosive, life-altering kiss in the foyer the night before. After Victor had confessed his love, he had simply picked me up, carried me up the grand staircase, and laid me in his bed. He had held me against his chest, murmuring promises into my hair until pure exhaustion had pulled us both into a deep, dreamless sleep. It was a profound statement of respect. He wasn't rushing to conquer my body. He was completely, unconditionally claiming my heart. Carefully, so as not to wake him, I shifted slightly, tracing the sharp line of his jaw with my fingertips. But Victor was a light sleeper. His thick eyelashes fluttered, and those piercing, stormy gray eyes opened, immediately locking onto mine. A slow, breathtakingly warm smile spread across his lips, a smile reserved entirely for me. "Good morning," Victor murmured, his morning voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a cascade of pleasurable shivers straight down my spine. His massive hand slid from my waist to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing over my bottom lip. I was half afraid I would wake up and find that last night was nothing more than a beautiful hallucination. "It wasn't a hallucination," I whispered back, leaning eagerly into his touch, my omega purring softly in the back of my throat. "I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere." "Good," Victor growled softly, leaning in to press a deep, lingering kiss to my forehead, then to the tip of my nose, and finally, capturing my lips in a slow, intoxicating kiss that tasted like a sacred promise. "Because I intend to spend the rest of my life spoiling you, Ren." True to his word, the following month was a period of absolute, unadulterated bliss. The renovation contract was officially voided, torn up by Victor himself, and tossed into the fireplace. I was no longer an employee. I was the partner of the master of the house. My belongings were moved permanently into the master suite. The staff, led by the ever-loyal Harrison, treated me with the utmost reverence and respect. Victor was a completely different alpha behind closed doors. The terrifying, ruthless businessman the world feared melted away when it was just the two of us. He was endlessly attentive, fiercely protective, and incredibly romantic. He completely funded the launch of my independent interior design firm, converting one of the massive sunlit rooms on the first floor into a state-of-the-art studio just for me. "You do not work for me anymore, darling," Victor had told me, wrapping his arms around my waist as I stood weeping in my new, fully equipped studio. "You work for yourself. You are brilliant. I am merely providing the canvas. You will paint the masterpiece." Unlike Julian, who had constantly belittled my ambitions and tried to keep me locked in a gilded cage to soothe his own fragile ego, Victor pushed me to soar. He wanted the world to see my talent. He would sit in my studio for hours while reviewing his corporate contracts, simply to be near me, his heavy, comforting scent anchoring my focus. Our physical relationship progressed with a beautiful, agonizingly slow burn. Victor was meticulously careful with my boundaries, ensuring that I felt entirely safe and in control. Every touch, every kiss, every shared look was laced with absolute devotion. The night we finally crossed the threshold was a celebration of my firm's very first independent, high-profile contract. Victor had taken me out to a quiet, ridiculously exclusive restaurant in the city. When we returned to the manor, the air between us was crackling with a heavy, magnetic tension that could no longer be ignored. As soon as the heavy bedroom doors closed behind us, the careful restraint Victor had maintained for months finally shattered. There were no words exchanged, only a desperate, mutual hunger that consumed us both. His hands were everywhere, frantic yet incredibly reverent, worshipping my body as if I were made of fragile glass and precious gold. The contrast of his massive, powerful alpha frame against my softer, delicate omega build was intoxicating. When we finally came together, tangled in the silk sheets, it wasn't just a physical release. It was a profound, soul-deep merging. His dark cedar and ozone scent completely wrapped around my soft white peach and spring rain, fusing together into a permanent, undeniable bond. "You are my entire world, Ren," Victor had gasped against my lips, his heart pounding violently against my chest as he claimed me entirely. My heart, my soul, everything. I had cried tears of pure, unadulterated joy that night, feeling a level of love and security I never knew existed. I felt invincible. I felt like the painful chapters of my life were finally, definitively closed. But life, as I was about to learn, has a terrifying way of flipping the script when you least expect it. The first subtle warning sign appeared exactly 6 weeks after that perfect, life-altering night. It was a Tuesday morning. I was standing in the master bathroom, brushing my teeth and getting ready to head down to my studio. Victor was already in his suit, adjusting his tie in the mirror behind me. He looked sharp, intimidating, and ready to conquer the corporate world. Suddenly, Harrison knocked on the bedroom door, rolling in a silver cart with our morning breakfast and my usual cup of Earl Grey tea. The moment the scent of the steeped bergamot hit my nose, my stomach violently rebelled. A wave of intense, dizzying nausea crashed over me so fast my vision actually blurred. I dropped my toothbrush into the porcelain sink, slapped a hand over my mouth, and practically dove toward the toilet. I fell to my knees, violently emptying my stomach until my throat burned and my eyes watered. "Run!" Victor's voice was sharp with instant panic. He was beside me in a fraction of a second, his massive hands gently gathering my hair and holding it back, his other hand rubbing soothing, firm circles on my trembling back. His alpha pheromones spiked with distress, flooding the bathroom with the heavy scent of an incoming storm. "Darling, breathe. I have you. Harrison, call the private physician immediately." No, wait," I gasped, weakly waving a hand, leaning heavily against Victor's solid chest as the nausea slowly receded. I was trembling, my skin coated in a cold sweat. "I'm okay. Don't call the doctor, Victor. It's probably just a stomach bug. We had that rich seafood pasta last night. It just didn't agree with me." Victor looked entirely unconvinced. His stormy gray eyes were wide with worry, his jaw clenched tight. "You are completely pale, Ren. I am canceling my morning meetings. I am not leaving you here while you are ill." "Victor, please," I murmured, turning to cup his handsome, tense face. I forced a reassuring smile, though my stomach was still doing uncomfortable backflips. "I promise I'm fine. I just need to lie down for a bit. Go to your meetings. You have the merger finalization today. I'll just drink some ginger ale and rest in the studio." It took another 10 minutes of relentless coaxing to finally convince him to leave. Even then, he kissed my forehead 3 times, ordered Harrison to check on me every hour, and promised to be home before dinner. I spent the rest of the day curled up on the sofa in my studio, feeling absolutely drained. I wrote it off as food poisoning, but the nausea didn't go away. Over the next 2 weeks, the symptoms became impossible to ignore. My morning sickness became a daily, terrifying ritual. My sense of smell, usually sensitive as an omega, became downright agonizing. The smell of Victor's rich, expensive cologne, which usually made my knees weak with desire, suddenly made me dizzy. The aroma of roasted coffee from the kitchen made me gag. Worse than the sickness was the profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I found myself falling asleep at my drafting table at 2 in the afternoon, completely unable to keep my eyes open. My breasts felt incredibly tender, and my emotions were completely unhinged. I found myself sobbing uncontrollably over a slightly sad television commercial, only to start laughing hysterically a moment later. Victor, ever the observant and hyperprotective alpha, was growing increasingly frantic. He noticed my changing scent. He commented that I smelled sweeter, richer, like a sun-ripened peach, but he chalked it up to my hormones settling into our new bond. He kept demanding I see a doctor, and I kept inventing excuses, paralyzed by a creeping, terrifying suspicion that I was desperately trying to deny. I knew about omega biology. I had taken health classes. I knew exactly what these symptoms pointed to. But it was impossible. It couldn't be. Victor and I had been careful, hadn't we? My mind raced back to that first passionate night and the many nights that followed. We had been swept up in a tidal wave of emotion, raw hunger, and desperate claiming. Had we missed a step? Had nature simply found a way to override our precautions? The agonizing uncertainty finally broke me. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, while Victor was trapped in a marathon board meeting, I put on a heavy coat, pulled a baseball cap low over my face, and had the estate driver take me to a discreet pharmacy 2 towns over. I bought 3 different brands of pregnancy tests, paying in cash with trembling hands, feeling like a criminal hiding a massive, terrible secret. When I returned to the empty, quiet manor, I locked myself in the grand marble bathroom of the master suite. My hands shook so violently I could barely open the boxes. I followed the instructions meticulously, lining the 3 plastic sticks up on the marble vanity. The box said to wait 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes were the longest, most agonizing torture of my entire 24 years of existence. I paced the massive bathroom, chewing my thumbnail until it bled. My mind was a chaotic, terrifying whirlwind of disastrous scenarios. I was only 24. My career was literally just beginning to take off. I had just escaped a highly abusive relationship and finally found a fragile, beautiful peace. I wasn't ready to be a parent, but the real, soul-crushing terror wasn't about me. It was about Victor. Victor was 48 years old. He had already raised a child who had grown up to be an arrogant, abusive monster who had nearly destroyed my life. Julian was a glaring, painful failure in Victor's eyes. Why would a man who had already built his empire, who had already endured the tragedy of losing his wife and the disappointment of his only son, want to start all over again with a baby? What if he thought I did this on purpose? What if he thought I was just like Julian said, a manipulative, gold-digging omega who forgot his suppressants to trap the billionaire alpha and secure a permanent piece of the Vance fortune? The timer on my phone chimed, echoing sharply against the marble tiles. It sounded like a death knell. I slowly walked over to the vanity, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I squeezed my eyes shut, taking a deep, shuddering breath of the cedar-scented air to give myself strength, and then forced my eyes open. I stared down at the 3 plastic sticks. 2 pink lines. 2 pink lines. Pregnant. All 3 of them were glaring, undeniable, positive. My legs gave out completely. I collapsed onto the cold marble floor, my back hitting the edge of the grand bathtub. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around my stomach, a stomach that was currently harboring Victor Vance's child, Julian Vance's half-sibling. A choked, desperate sob tore from my throat. I was pregnant. I was carrying the child of the most powerful alpha in the country. Run! The deep, concerned voice echoing from the bedroom made my blood run instantly cold. Victor was home early. Heavy, purposeful footsteps approached the locked bathroom door. The brass handle jiggled. "Run, darling, the door is locked," Victor called out, his voice laced with immediate, rising panic. His heavy alpha pheromones began to seep under the crack of the door, searching for me. "Harrison said you returned from town looking pale. Are you ill again? Please, open the door. Let me in." I clapped a hand over my mouth to muffle my frantic sobs, staring with wide, terrified eyes at the 3 positive tests sitting on the counter. My entire world was about to shatter all over again, and I had absolutely no idea how to stop it. End of Part 5. Part 6. The heavy brass handle of the bathroom door rattled violently again, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the pristine marble-tiled space. "Run!" Victor's voice was no longer just concerned. It was laced with a dark, primal panic that vibrated through the very floorboards. A heavy fist pounded against the thick mahogany wood. "I can smell your distress. Your scent is completely souring. If you do not unlock this door in the next 3 seconds, I am going to break it completely off its hinges." He wasn't bluffing. I knew he had the sheer physical strength to do it without a second thought. I'm coming." I choked out, my voice sounding incredibly small and broken. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely use them. I scrambled up from the cold floor, desperately grabbing at the 3 positive pregnancy tests scattered on the vanity. I had some frantic, half-baked idea to hide them in the trash can, to buy myself just a few more hours to figure out how to break the news. But my sweaty, trembling fingers betrayed me. One of the plastic sticks slipped from my grasp, clattering loudly into the porcelain sink just as I reached out and flicked the deadbolt. The door flew open with such explosive force that a gust of wind swept into the room. Victor stood in the doorway, a towering, terrifying portrait of alpha protectiveness. His suit jacket was already discarded, his tie loosened, and his chest was heaving with rapid breaths. His stormy gray eyes swept the room with lethal intensity, searching for whatever threat was causing my severe distress. When his gaze finally landed on me, standing by the sink with tears streaming down my pale cheeks and my arms wrapped protectively around my stomach, the lethal predator vanished. "Darling," Victor breathed, his voice cracking with raw emotion. He crossed the bathroom in 2 massive strides and fell to his knees right in front of me, heedless of his expensive trousers on the hard floor. His large, warm hands immediately reached out, gripping my trembling hips, grounding me. "What is it? What's wrong? Are you in pain? Talk to me, Ren, please." I couldn't speak. A fresh wave of terrified sobs tore through my throat. I looked down at this incredibly powerful, untouchable billionaire who was currently kneeling at my feet, his eyes wide with a desperate need to protect me. The contrast between his absolute devotion and the terrible secret I was holding broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. I slowly opened my clenched hand, revealing the 2 pregnancy tests I had managed to grab. I didn't say a word. I just held my shaking palm out to him, while the 3rd test sat glaringly visible in the sink right next to his shoulder. The bathroom went deathly, suffocatingly quiet. Victor's gaze dropped from my tear-streaked face to my open hand. Time seemed to stop completely. The heavy scent of cedar and ozone in the air froze, the agitated alpha pheromones instantly stalling as his brain tried to process the 2 pink lines staring back at him. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the impact. I waited for the heavy sigh of disappointment. I waited for his face to harden into that terrifying, calculating CEO mask. I waited for the inevitable accusation that I was just a greedy, manipulative omega who had intentionally trapped him for his fortune, just like his son had always claimed I was. "I'm sorry," I whispered brokenly, the words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush. "Victor, I swear to you, I didn't do this on purpose. I know we were careful. I don't know how this happened. I know you're 48. I know you already raised Julian, and you don't want to start all over again. I know people will say horrible things about us, that I planned this to steal your money, but I swear on my life I didn't. You don't have to stay with me. You don't have to claim it. I can leave, I can. Stop." The word was spoken softly, but it carried an undeniable weight that instantly cut off my frantic rambling. I flinched, keeping my eyes tightly shut, terrified of seeing the anger on his face. But there was no anger. Instead, I felt Victor's large, calloused hands gently wrap around my wrists. He slowly pulled my trembling hands away from my chest, taking the plastic tests from my grip and setting them aside on the counter. Then his palms slid up my arms, up to my shoulders, and finally cupped my face. His thumbs began to gently, rhythmically wipe away the hot tears soaking my cheeks. "Run," Victor murmured, his voice so thick and rough it was barely recognizable. "Open your eyes. Look at me." I took a shuddering breath and slowly fluttered my eyes open. What I saw completely stopped my heart. Victor Vance, the ruthless, untouchable billionaire who made corporate rivals tremble with a single glare, was crying. Silent, beautiful tears were tracking down his sharp cheekbones, pooling in the corners of his stormy gray eyes, which were entirely blown wide with absolute, unadulterated awe. "Victor," I whispered, utterly bewildered by his reaction. He didn't answer with words. He shifted his grip, sliding his massive hands down my sides until they came to rest gently, reverently, over my flat stomach. He stared at the place where his hands rested, his jaw trembling slightly. The alpha pheromones in the room completely shifted, transforming from agitated ozone into the deepest, warmest, most overwhelming wave of pure cedar and amber I had ever experienced. It was the scent of absolute, unconditional love. "A baby," Victor breathed, the words escaping his lips like a sacred prayer. He looked up at me, his eyes shining with a brilliance that rivaled the stars. "You are carrying my child. You're not angry?" I asked, my voice wavering, still unable to fully comprehend his reaction. "You don't think I trapped you?" A flash of fierce, protective fire ignited in his eyes, chasing away the tears. "Never say that again, Ren. Never. The very idea that I would ever associate you with such vile, manipulative behavior is an insult to the beautiful, pure soul I know you possess. You are my partner. You are the love of my life." He stood up smoothly, his towering frame completely engulfing my smaller one as he pulled me into a crushing, desperate embrace. I buried my face in his neck, my hands clutching handfuls of his dress shirt as the heavy, crushing weight of my anxiety finally evaporated. I was so terrified. I sobbed against his skin, finally allowing myself to feel the joy bubbling beneath the fear. I was so scared I was going to lose you. You will never lose me, Victor growled possessively into my hair, his arms tightening around my waist as if trying to fuse our bodies together. I told you, you are my entire world. And this. He placed a large hand firmly over my stomach again, pressing me flush against him. This is the greatest miracle I could have ever asked for. A second chance. A chance to build a true family, with the Omega I love more than life itself. But Julian, I hesitated, the ghost of my trauma still whispering in my ear. He's going to be furious. The press, the public, they're going to tear us apart. They'll say I'm an opportunist. Victor gently pulled back, just enough to look me in the eye. The mask of the lethal CEO was back, but this time, it wasn't directed at me. It was a shield raised to protect our newly formed family from the rest of the world. Let them say whatever they wish, Victor said, his voice dropping into a deadly, uncompromising baritone. The opinions of sheep do not concern the wolf. The Vance Empire is mine, and I will burn it to the ground before I let anyone, including my own son, disrespect the mother of my child. Julian is a failure of my past. You and this baby are my absolute future. I will protect you with every breath in my body, Rin. Do you trust me? Looking into those fierce, devoted gray eyes, the last lingering shadows of my doubt completely vanished. I trust you, I whispered. A radiant, incredibly handsome smile broke across Victor's face. He leaned down, capturing my lips in a deep, passionate kiss that tasted of salt, relief, and undeniable devotion. When he finally pulled away, he effortlessly scooped me up into his arms, carrying me out of the bathroom and toward the massive king-sized bed. No more working in the studio for today, Victor announced, gently depositing me into the center of the plush mattress and pulling the heavy silk comforter up to my chest. You are exhausted, and you have been carrying this immense burden entirely alone for weeks. From this moment on, you are going to rest. I am going to pamper you so thoroughly you will not have to lift a single finger. Victor, I'm pregnant, not broken, I protested weakly, though a soft giggle escaped my lips as he began to frantically fluff the pillows around my head. I still have client commissions to finish. The clients will wait, Victor stated firmly, stripping off his tie and kicking off his expensive shoes before climbing into the bed beside me. He pulled me securely against his side, his large hand immediately returning to rest possessively over my stomach. You are creating a Vance heir. That requires your utmost dedication and plenty of sleep. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The absolute certainty in his voice, the protective weight of his hand, and the soothing blanket of his cedar pheromones washed over me, lulling my exhausted body into a state of profound peace. Over the next few weeks, Victor's protective instincts skyrocketed to astronomical levels. He hired a private, world-renowned obstetrician to come directly to the manor, refusing to let me step foot into a public clinic where the paparazzi might catch a glimpse of us. He completely overhauled the manor's kitchen, firing the old chefs and bringing in a specialized nutritionist who curated my meals based entirely on what my morning sickness would tolerate. My studio was moved from the first floor to a massive, sunlit room directly adjoining the master suite, so I wouldn't have to walk up and down the grand staircase too often. It was bordering on ridiculous, but it was also incredibly endearing. For the first time in my life, I was being cherished. I was the center of an alpha's entire universe, not because of what I could do for his image, but simply because of who I was. At our 8-week ultrasound, the reality of our situation truly set in. The private doctor set up the portable machine in our bedroom. Victor sat in a chair pulled tight against the mattress, holding my hand in a vice-like grip. When the cold gel was applied and the wand slid over my slightly rounded lower belly, a sudden, rapid thump-thump-thump filled the quiet room. It sounded like a galloping horse. It was the strongest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Tears instantly blurred my vision. I looked over at Victor. The billionaire CEO, the most feared man in the corporate world, was staring at the black and white monitor with his jaw completely slacked. A single tear escaped his eye, trailing down his cheek as he brought my knuckles to his lips, kissing them fervently. A strong heartbeat, the doctor smiled warmly, pointing to a tiny, flickering mass on the screen. The pup is perfectly healthy and growing exactly on schedule. Congratulations, Mr. Vance, Mr. Wren. Our pup, Victor whispered reverently, his eyes never leaving the screen. He squeezed my hand, leaning over to kiss my forehead. Thank you, Wren. Thank you for this. It was the happiest moment of my life. But the protective bubble Victor had built around the estate could only hold out for so long. I was beginning to show. My waistline was thickening, my regular clothes no longer fit, and the undeniable glow of an expecting Omega was becoming obvious to anyone who looked closely. The Vance Foundation was preparing for its massive annual shareholder gala, an event Victor, as the CEO, absolutely had to host. And as his recognized partner, I was expected to be right by his side. We were going to have to step out into the blinding spotlight. We were going to have to announce the pregnancy to the world. And more terrifyingly, we were going to have to face Julian. The night before the gala, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom, nervously smoothing my hands over the custom-tailored, midnight blue maternity suit Victor had ordered for me. The fabric draped beautifully, but it did nothing to hide the unmistakable, rounded swell of my 4-month pregnancy. Victor stepped up behind me, wrapping his massive arms around my waist and resting his hands over mine on my stomach. He pressed a kiss to the juncture of my neck, his scent calming my racing heart. "Are you ready for tomorrow, my love?" he murmured, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror's reflection. "I'm terrified," I admitted honestly, leaning back into his solid strength. "The media is going to have a field day. Julian is going to lose his mind when he sees me." Victor's eyes darkened dangerously in the mirror, his alpha dominance surging to the surface. "Let them try. Tomorrow night, the entire world will learn that you are carrying the true heir to the Vance Empire. And if my son steps out of line, I will finally, permanently sever him from this family. You have nothing to fear, Rin. I am the king of this city, and you are my queen. We will face them together." I took a deep breath, looking at our reflection. The young, broken boy who had walked out into the rain months ago was completely gone. In his place stood a strong, loved, expecting Omega, fiercely protected by the most powerful alpha in the room. The storm was coming, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the rain. End of Part 6. Part 7. The limousine ride to the Grand Hotel in the city center felt like a slow, agonizing march toward a battlefield. Outside the tinted windows, the city was a blur of neon lights and pouring rain. But inside the spacious cabin of the vehicle, the air was thick with the heavy, comforting scent of dark cedar and ozone. I sat rigidly against the plush leather seats, my hands resting instinctively over the undeniable, rounded swell of my 4-month pregnancy hidden beneath the midnight blue silk of my tailored suit. My heart was hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. Victor sat beside me, radiating an aura of absolute untouchable power. He was dressed in a bespoke black tuxedo that fit his massive, muscular frame with lethal perfection. Sensing my spiraling anxiety, he reached across the seat, enveloping my trembling, smaller hands in his large, warm palms. He lifted them to his lips, pressing a firm, reassuring kiss to my knuckles. "Breathe, my love," Victor murmured, his deep baritone cutting through the silence of the cabin like a warm knife. "You are trembling." "I'm trying," I whispered, offering a fragile smile. "But there are going to be hundreds of cameras out there. The moment I step out of this car, the whole world is going to know. They're going to dissect every piece of our lives." "Let them," Victor said, his stormy gray eyes darkening with a fierce, protective fire. "Let them look at the masterpiece you are. Let them see that the Vance Empire has a true future. And remember, Run, you are not stepping out there alone. You are stepping out there as my chosen partner. No one in that ballroom will dare breathe a word against you while I am breathing." The limousine slowly coasted to a halt. The deafening roar of the crowd and the frantic shouts of the paparazzi penetrated the thick glass. The heavy door was pulled open by a member of Victor's private security detail, and a blinding barrage of camera flashes instantly lit up the rainy night. Victor stepped out first. The moment his polished leather shoes hit the red carpet, the chaotic shouting died down for a fraction of a second, suffocated by the sheer, imposing dominance of his alpha presence. He turned, ignoring the frantic clicks of the cameras, and offered me his hand. I took a deep, shuddering breath, anchoring myself to the scent of his cedar pheromones, and placed my hand in his. As I stepped out of the vehicle and into the glaring spotlight, a collective, audible gasp rippled through the sea of reporters and photographers. For the first 5 seconds, they were simply shocked to see me, Julian Vance's notorious, discarded ex-boyfriend, standing by the side of the legendary Victor Vance. But then, the flashes illuminated the unmistakable, rounded curve of my stomach pushing against the silk of my suit. The silence completely shattered. Pandemonium erupted. "Mr. Vance, is he pregnant? Run, Are you carrying Victor Vance's child? What does Julian have to say about this? Mr. Vance, look this way. Are you naming him as your official heir? The shouted questions crashed against us like a tidal wave. My Omega instincts flared with panic, urging me to hide, but Victor didn't even flinch. He smoothly wrapped a heavy, possessive arm around my waist, pulling me flush against his solid side. In a move that was deliberately calculated to send a definitive message to every camera lens present, Victor placed his large, bare hand directly over my pregnant belly, his long fingers splayed protectively over our growing pup. He didn't answer a single question. He simply raised his chin, his stormy eyes glaring at the press with a lethal, silent warning, and guided me down the red carpet. He moved like a king protecting his most precious treasure, and the crowd instinctively parted for him. When we finally stepped into the grand, opulent ballroom of the hotel, the atmosphere shifted from chaotic shouting to a tense, suffocating wave of high society whispers. The room was filled with the country's most elite billionaires, politicians, and socialites. The moment we crossed the threshold, every single head turned. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes stopped. The string quartet playing in the corner seemed to falter for a beat. The air grew incredibly heavy as hundreds of alphas and omegas took in the sight of us. I kept my head held high, channeling every ounce of strength Victor had poured into me over the last few months. Victor kept his hand firmly on the small of my back, radiating a heavy, intoxicating wave of dominant pheromones that silently demanded absolute respect from everyone in the room. "Magnificent," Victor murmured in my ear, his breath ghosting over my scent gland. "You are outshining every single person in this room, Run." We were immediately approached by board members and foreign dignitaries. To my shock, no one brought up Julian. No one dared. They looked at the massive, terrifying CEO. They looked at the protective way he hovered over me. They looked at the undeniable evidence of our child, and they simply offered their congratulations. They bowed their heads, acknowledging the shifting hierarchy of the Vance Empire. I wasn't an outcast. I was the Omega carrying the new royal bloodline. For the first hour, the night felt like a surreal, triumphant victory. I was sipping sparkling water, laughing softly at a dry joke Victor had made regarding a rival CEO, when the hairs on the back of my neck suddenly stood on end. My stomach dropped. A sharp, aggressive, agonizingly familiar scent of burnt pine and sour alcohol sliced through the elegant perfumes in the room. I froze, the crystal glass trembling in my hand. Victor felt my tension instantly. His arm tightened around my waist, his stormy eyes snapping away from the conversation and scanning the crowd like a radar. The sea of elegantly dressed guests suddenly parted, revealing the one person we had inevitably known we would have to face. Julian. He looked entirely derailed. His usually immaculate suit was slightly rumpled, his tie was crooked, and he looked thin and haggard. He was holding a half-empty glass of whiskey, his eyes bloodshot and completely wild. The arrogant, untouchable boy who had tormented me for 2 years was gone, replaced by a desperate, furious shadow. The entire ballroom went dead silent. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Everyone knew the history. Everyone was waiting for the explosion. Julian marched straight toward our VIP table, his chest heaving. He didn't even look at his father at first. His manic, bloodshot eyes were locked entirely on me. "So the rumors are true," Julian sneered, his slurred voice carrying loudly across the quiet room. "You really dug your claws all the way to the top, didn't you, Ren? Couldn't be satisfied with the son, so you spread your legs for the father." I flinched, the ugly words hitting me like physical blows, but before I could even process the humiliation, Victor moved. He didn't shout. He didn't raise a hand. He simply took a single step forward, placing his massive body entirely between Julian and me. The raw, unfiltered alpha dominance that exploded from Victor was so violently intense that several Omegas nearby actually gasped and stepped back. The scent of ozone crackled in the air, heavy and lethal, simulating the terrifying pressure of an incoming hurricane. "You will silence your tongue this instant, boy," Victor commanded. His voice was deathly quiet, barely above a whisper, yet it echoed with a terrifying authority that rattled the crystal chandeliers. "Or I will cut it out of your mouth myself." Julian stumbled back a step, physically hit by the sheer force of his father's pheromones. But the alcohol and the humiliation made him reckless. He laughed, a harsh, broken, ugly sound. "Why are you defending him, father?" Julian shouted, his face contorting with rage. "He's trash. He's a weak, pathetic excuse for an Omega. He's just using you for your money. Look at him." Julian practically lunged to the side, trying to get a clear view of me behind Victor's broad shoulders. And in that moment, his wild, angry eyes finally dropped. They locked onto the rounded, undeniable swell of my 4-month pregnancy wrapped in midnight blue silk. Julian froze completely. His jaw literally dropped open. The glass of whiskey slipped from his numb fingers, shattering against the polished marble floor with a loud, ringing crash. "No," Julian whispered, the color draining from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His eyes darted from my stomach to my face, and then slowly up to his father's terrifying, stoic expression. "No, that's impossible." "It is not only possible, it is reality," Victor stated, his voice completely devoid of any paternal warmth. It was the voice of an executioner. "Ren is carrying my child. He is carrying the true heir to the Vance Empire. A child who will be raised with the respect, honor, and strength that you completely failed to grasp. He's carrying you're having a baby with my ex-boyfriend?" Julian shrieked, his voice cracking into a hysterical, devastated pitch. He lunged forward, his hands grasping frantically at his own hair. "This is sick. This is a joke. You're ruining my life. That's supposed to be my empire. I'm your heir. You are nothing." Victor's voice cracked like a whip, bringing Julian to his knees. "You forfeited your right to my empire the day you decided to abuse the Omega who was entrusted to your care. You are weak, Julian. You are cruel. And you are a disgrace to the Vance name." Victor slowly raised his hand, signaling the massive security detail that had materialized from the shadows of the ballroom. "I am officially cutting you off," Victor declared publicly, ensuring every single CEO, board member, and reporter in the room heard the final judgment. "Your trust funds are frozen. Your positions in my companies are terminated. You will be escorted from this premises, and if you ever come within 50 miles of my partner or my unborn child again, I will have you buried so deep no one will ever find you." "Father, no. Please," Julian sobbed, thrashing violently as 2 massive security guards grabbed him by the arms, lifting him completely off his feet. The arrogant alpha was reduced to a weeping, pathetic mess. "You can't do this. Ren, tell him. Ren, please." I looked at Julian as he was dragged backward toward the grand exit. For 2 years, that man had been the source of all my nightmares. He had made me feel worthless, ugly, and entirely alone. But looking at him now, I didn't feel fear. I didn't even feel anger. I just felt a profound, overwhelming pity. "Goodbye, Julian," I said softly, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. The doors slammed shut behind him, cutting off his frantic screaming. The ballroom remained absolutely paralyzed in shock. Victor slowly turned around to face me. The terrifying, lethal executioner instantly vanished. His stormy gray eyes softened into pools of melted silver, his chest heaving slightly as he reached out, gently cupping my face in his large, warm hands. "Are you all right, my love?" Victor murmured, completely ignoring the hundreds of people staring at us in absolute awe. He pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead. "Did he upset you? Did he distress the baby?" "I'm okay," I whispered, a genuine, radiant smile finally breaking across my face. I placed my hands over his, leaning into his warmth. "I've never been better. You protected us." "Always," Victor promised, resting his forehead against mine. "For the rest of my life." He finally turned back to the room, keeping me securely tucked against his side. The lethal alpha dominance was replaced by a calm, regal authority. He raised a fresh glass of champagne that a trembling waiter had hurried over to offer. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor's voice boomed across the ballroom, commanding the attention of the elite. "I apologize for the brief interruption, but please raise your glasses. Tonight, we do not just celebrate the financial success of the Vance Foundation. Tonight, I ask you to celebrate the future. To my brilliant, beautiful partner, Run, and to our growing family." The room hesitated for a fraction of a second, still reeling from the explosive drama before a thunderous wave of applause erupted. Glasses were raised, cheers echoed against the vaulted ceilings, and the cameras flashed, no longer capturing a scandal, but documenting a triumphant love story. I leaned my head against Victor's strong shoulder, my hand resting protectively over our pup. The storm had finally passed. Julian was gone. The shadows of the past were completely banished, and as I looked up into the adoring, devoted eyes of the billionaire alpha who held my entire heart, I knew that our beautiful, unshakable future had officially begun. End of Part 7. Part 8. The final months of my pregnancy transformed the Vance Manor from a beautiful, renovated house into a warm, beating sanctuary. After the explosive public confrontation at the gala, the media storm had raged for a few intense weeks, but Victor's ironclad grip on the press quickly suffocated any negative narratives. Julian was gone, completely exiled from the city and the family fortune, a ghost of a nightmare that could no longer touch us. The world outside our towering iron gates simply ceased to matter. Inside, we were building an empire of our own, one founded entirely on love, respect, and profound healing. By the time I reached my 9th month, I was massive. The delicate, tailored suits were long gone, replaced by Victor's oversized, incredibly soft cashmere sweaters that smelled heavily of his dark cedar and ozone. I waddled more than I walked, my back constantly ached, and my omega instincts were entirely consumed by a fierce, restless nesting urge. I spent hours in the newly finished nursery located right next to the master suite. I had designed it myself, painting the high walls a soft, calming sage green and filling the space with warm, natural sunlight, plush rugs, and an antique oak crib that Victor had meticulously assembled with his own 2 hands. It was late on a snowy Friday evening when the heavy, peaceful stillness of the manor was finally broken. I was sitting in the grand library, the very room where I had first met Victor, curled up in a massive leather armchair by the roaring fireplace. Victor was sitting on the rug right between my legs, having completely abandoned a multi-million-dollar quarterly report just so he could massage my swollen, aching ankles. The firelight danced across his sharp, handsome features, softening the intimidating lines of the billionaire CEO into the devoted, hopelessly deeply in love alpha who was about to become a father. "You are working too hard," I murmured, running my fingers softly through his thick, raven hair. Victor leaned into my touch, closing his eyes and letting out a deep, contented rumble. "The only work that matters to me right now is ensuring you are comfortable, my love. The board can manage without me. My place is here." He turned his head to press a lingering kiss to the inside of my knee, when suddenly a sharp, breathtaking cramp violently seized my lower abdomen. I gasped, my fingers instinctively tightening in his hair. The pain was different from the dull aches I had been experiencing for weeks. It was deep, agonizing, and wrapped entirely around my torso like an iron band. Victor's eyes snapped open, instantly locking onto my face. The relaxed alpha vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by high-alert, protective panic. His scent spiked, filling the library with the heavy, electric smell of an incoming storm. "Run!" Victor's voice was sharp. He was on his feet in an instant, his massive hands gently hovering over my sides. "What is it? A contraction?" I think so." I breathed out, squeezing my eyes shut as another wave of intense pressure rolled through me. "Victor, it really hurts. I think it's time. I think the baby is coming." What followed was a masterclass in Victor's terrifying efficiency and overwhelming devotion. He didn't panic, though I could smell the absolute terror radiating from his pheromones. Instead of rushing me out into the freezing snow to a hospital, Victor carried me effortlessly in his arms to the private, state-of-the-art medical wing he had secretly ordered built into the west wing of the estate months ago, specifically for this exact moment. The private obstetrician and a team of specialized nurses were already waiting, having been living on the estate for the past 2 weeks at Victor's strict command. The next several hours were a blur of blinding pain, exhaustion, and overwhelming alpha presence. Labor was the hardest, most agonizing marathon of my life. My body felt as though it were being torn apart, but through every single agonizing second, Victor never left my side. He sat on the edge of the medical bed, holding my hand so tightly I thought my bones might crack, but I desperately needed the anchor. He wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, whispered endless praises and prayers against my ear, and continuously flooded the room with his soothing cedar scent to keep my distressed omega instincts from completely spiraling. "You are doing so perfectly, my brave, beautiful boy," Victor chanted, his voice thick with tears as I let out a hoarse, agonizing scream, bearing down for what felt like the 100th time. "I am right here. I will never leave you. Just a little more, Ren. Our pup is almost here." "I can't," I sobbed, shaking violently against the soaked sheets, completely devoid of energy. "Victor, I can't do it anymore." "Yes, you can," Victor commanded, not with harshness, but with an absolute, unshakable belief in my strength that pierced straight through the pain. He pressed his forehead against mine, his stormy gray eyes locking onto my tear-filled ones. You survived the darkest storms, Ren. You brought this entire estate back to life. You are the strongest person I have ever known. Bring our child into the world. Bring our family home." His words ignited a final, desperate spark of strength deep within my chest. With a guttural, tear-soaked cry, I pushed with absolutely everything I had left. And then, the room fell silent for one terrifying, agonizing second before the sharp, incredibly loud wail of a newborn shattered the quiet. "He's here," the doctor announced, a wide smile breaking across her face. "Congratulations. You have a perfectly healthy, beautiful baby boy." I collapsed back against the pillows, gasping for air, tears streaming uncontrollably down my face. Victor let out a broken, ragged sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief and joy. He kissed my face a dozen times, his tears mixing with my sweat, before the nurse gently placed the tiny, wailing bundle onto my bare chest. I looked down, and the entire universe completely shifted on its axis. He was tiny, incredibly red, and screaming his little lungs out, but he was the most perfect thing I had ever seen. He had a shock of thick, dark raven hair exactly like Victor's. When I tentatively reached down, brushing my trembling finger against his impossibly soft cheek, his crying slowed into soft, hiccuping whines. I inhaled his scent, a pure, milky sweetness with the faintest, underlying hint of ozone. "Elias," Victor whispered, his massive, trembling hand coming down to gently cover the baby's tiny back, while his other hand remained securely wrapped around mine. He stared at our son with a level of reverence and awe that stole the breath straight from my lungs. "Elias Vance. He's beautiful." I wept, looking up at the billionaire alpha who had saved my life in more ways than one. "We did it, Victor. We really did it." "You did it, my perfect Omega," Victor murmured, leaning down to kiss my lips with overwhelming, profound devotion. "You gave me the world." 3 years later. Papa, look. I painted a dinosaur." I looked up from the drafting table in my sunlit studio, wiping a smudge of charcoal from my cheek, and smiled brightly. 3-year-old Elias came tearing into the room, his little legs moving as fast as they could carry him. He was wearing miniature denim overalls, his dark, raven hair sticking up in messy, adorable tufts. His hands and cheeks were completely covered in bright, washable green paint, and he was proudly holding up a piece of construction paper that looked absolutely nothing like a dinosaur. "It's a masterpiece, Eli." I laughed, kneeling down on the hardwood floor to catch him as he crashed into my chest, not caring in the slightest about the green paint getting on my designer shirt. I pressed a loud, exaggerated kiss to his cheek, making him erupt into a fit of high-pitched giggles. "Careful, little monster, you are ruining your papa's clothes." A deep, warm baritone echoed from the doorway. I looked up to see Victor leaning casually against the doorframe. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, having just returned from the city, but the intimidating CEO aura was entirely absent. His stormy gray eyes were completely soft, crinkling at the corners with genuine, radiant happiness as he looked at us. He had completely transformed as a father. With Julian, Victor had been absent, constantly prioritizing the building of his empire over the raising of his son. But with Elias, Victor was present for every single milestone. He rarely worked past 5 o'clock. He attended every toddler art class, read bedtime stories every single night, and looked at our son as if he had hung the moon and the stars. "Daddy!" Elias shrieked, abandoning me entirely to run toward Victor. Victor caught him effortlessly, scooping the paint-covered toddler high into the air, eliciting another round of delighted giggles. He held Elias securely in one massive arm, completely ignoring the green handprints currently staining his $1,000 suit jacket, and walked over to me. He reached out his free hand, gently hauling me up from the floor and pulling me flush against his side. He leaned down, pressing a deep, familiar kiss to my lips that still, even after all these years, sent a wave of electric heat straight down my spine. "How was your day, my love?" Victor murmured, his dark cedar and ozone scent wrapping around me, mingling perfectly with my white peach and the sweet, milky scent of our pup. "Perfect," I replied honestly, resting my head against his broad shoulder as we both looked at Elias, who was currently trying to put a green fingerprint on Victor's nose. My independent interior design firm was thriving. My designs were featured in international magazines, but none of it held a candle to the life I had inside these walls. Later that evening, after we had wrestled Elias into the bathtub and finally gotten him to sleep in the nursery, Victor and I stepped out onto the grand balcony of the master suite. The night air was crisp and cool, the sky above the pine forests painted with a million glittering stars. Victor wrapped his heavy, warm coat around my shoulders from behind, pulling my back flush against his solid chest. His strong arms crossed securely over my stomach, holding me tight. I looked out at the sprawling, magnificent estate that I had poured my soul into renovating. I thought about the terrified, broken boy who had walked through the iron gates 4 years ago, carrying the shattered pieces of his heart, desperate for an escape from an abusive alpha. I always thought the greatest mistake of my life was letting a boy break my heart. But as I leaned back into the overwhelming, unyielding warmth of Victor Vance, I finally understood the truth. It wasn't a mistake. It was the universe violently clearing the path, forcing me to walk away from the boy, so I could be found by the man who was destined to piece it all back together. "What are you thinking about, Rin?" Victor murmured into my hair, his deep voice vibrating pleasantly against my back. I smiled, turning my head slightly to capture his lips in a soft, profoundly grateful kiss. "I was just thinking," I whispered, looking deep into the eyes of my alpha, my protector, my husband, "that I finally found my home." Victor's arms tightened around me, an unbreakable promise forged in the quiet night. "Always," he promised. End of story. Wow, what an incredible journey that was. Let's take a moment to unpack everything we just experienced in this story. This isn't just a dramatic tale of forbidden romance. It is a profound story about healing from trauma, reclaiming your self-worth, and discovering what true devotion actually looks like. At its core, this story is a brilliant exploration of contrasts, specifically between Julian and Victor. Julian represents a highly toxic, deeply insecure form of power. He used his alpha status, his youth, and his wealth to cage Rin. He constantly tore down Ren's self-esteem because shrinking his partner was the only way Julian could feel big. He didn't want a soulmate, he wanted a submissive possession. But then we have Victor. Victor is the absolute epitome of a green flag alpha. Despite his terrifying reputation in the business world and his immense billionaire status, his true power lies in his restraint, his patience, and his unwavering respect. He doesn't use his resources to trap Rin. He uses them to build a safe fortress around him, so Rin can finally breathe. Think back to that beautiful moment in the studio. Victor tells Rin, "I am merely providing the canvas. You will paint the masterpiece." That is the defining difference. Toxic love limits you. True love empowers you to soar. The Omegaverse elements in this story are also used so beautifully to reflect the emotional states of our characters. We constantly see Ren's scent shifting, souring in moments of pure terror when Julian calls, only to be neutralized and comforted by Victor's heavy cedar and ozone pheromones. Victor's scent acts as a literal and metaphorical weighted blanket. It represents the absolute safety and grounding that Rin had been entirely deprived of for 2 years. And of course, we have to talk about the age gap and the taboo nature of their relationship. It could have easily felt purely scandalous, but the story grounds it in deep emotional maturity. Victor didn't rush. He didn't conquer. He waited. He let Rin set the boundaries and heal at his own pace, proving that mutual respect is the ultimate foundation of any lasting bond. When the pregnancy was finally revealed, Victor's immediate tears of joy and fierce protection completely shattered the cold billionaire trope. He didn't care about the press or his legacy. He only cared about his family. Ultimately, Ren's journey is incredibly inspiring. He walked out into the freezing rain with absolutely nothing, and he ended up redesigning not just a historic manor, but his entire destiny. He found his voice, launched his own successful firm, and built a beautiful family. It goes to show that sometimes, a broken heart isn't a tragic ending. It's just the universe forcing you onto the path where you truly belong. And that brings us to the end of today's video here on your BL Boyfriend. I really hope you loved this emotional, slow-burn romance as much as I loved bringing it to you. If your heart melted for Victor and Rin, please make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let me know down in the comments, what was your absolute favorite moment between Victor and Rin? And do you think Julian finally learned his lesson, or is he still throwing tantrums out there somewhere? I can't wait to read your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all in the next story.